So we're looking at paper 1, question 3, the structure question. Now, I mentioned in the introduction video that we've got little helpful tips here from AQA. So what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes the focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. So I've got a model, I've got an answer here, a good answer from one of our learners. So straight away, look, the answer goes straight in addressing the question. The writer uses an interesting structural technique that I really like at the beginning of the story. So straight away, look, focusing on that third bullet point there, any other structural features that interest you. Referencing the question is a good idea because it tells the examiner you've read the question and you kind of know what you're talking about. The writer gets our attention by showing us a bottle. Now that's in the text. I presume it's cold and refreshing, and they mention in a warm place. Now the story is set in a warm place. It says it's hot and the narrator is thirsty. Then in the last paragraph, the writer then brings our focus back to the water bottle. Now what the learner has done here has referenced something that's focused at the beginning of the source and then something that's focused on at the end of the source. Now this is called a circular narrative. The learner hasn't mentioned that, and the teacher here has just annotated what the technique was. That's not important at this stage that the learner hasn't annotated it, but it would be good if you do, if your answer wasn't going to be as long as in-depth as this one is, and I'll show you that now. So the writer brings our focus back. So changing focus is a structural technique. As you may have noticed at the beginning, look, what the writer focuses your attention on and how and why the writer changes this focus. So focus is quite an important structural technique. The writer then brings our focus back to the water bottle, but this time the bottle is depleted. So that kind of implies that time has gone on and something has happened in the text. The narrator here drains the last drop of water from the bottle. So that's a good first point. And there's quotes in there to back up the point, even though the learner hasn't said named the structural technique. This to me creates the idea that the writer is using the water bottle as a means to contrast the time. Now, contrast kind of sits between language or structure, but a contrast can be structural. At the beginning of the day, the bottle was cold and full, and the day has just begun, full of sunlight and warmth. But towards the end of the day, the bottle is slowly drained until it has no more water and is so empty and is neither hot nor cold. And at the end of the day, the sun goes down just like the water from the bottle. So that's a nice analogy and quite in-depth analysis there. That's good. The learner goes on. Furthermore, the writer uses another structural technique that grabs my interest, again referencing that third bullet point, and that is using tension to create imagery. Now, imagery is a language technique, but tension and rising tension is a structural technique. So that's quite clever. The writer does this in the 6th and 7th paragraphs. So we haven't got a direct quote here yet, but the learner has told us where to look. But here's the quote. Look, hopefully her luck's about to change as she saw something glinting beneath a large boulder. So a good and relevant quote. Here the writer is building up a probable monumental discovery, but the tension, I think, the writer is showcasing is that Alice, the narrator in the story, is left a difficult decision, and that's inferred. That's really good analysis. What the learner's done there has referenced the tension that's building up, taken some inference from it, and come to a conclusion. That's really good. She, Alice, the narrator, could fetch someone or tell her best friend Sheila, who is the deputy on the dig, Alice is not a trained archaeologist. As another quote to back up that build-up of tension that the learner mentions. Here I think the writer is using a build-up to showcase the pressure that Alice is under as she wants to find treasure but doesn't want to undermine her place as a volunteer. Again, really good analysis. It's not directly taken from the source. This is the learner's inference about what they've taken from what the writer has chosen to include. Alice also seems to be rather selfish in that she doesn't want anyone else joining in uncovering the treasure. Again, some nice inference there. And then the last point from the learner here. As it is the last day of her day at the campsite, Alice, the narrator, decides to go and get the treasure. In the days and weeks to come, Alice will look back at this moment. This is an important step in Alice's life and she reveals her true motives in that she would do anything for personal gain. That again is inference from the learner. But and this little section here, in the days and weeks to come, that bit in the text, the writer has actually used time as a structural tool. So they've gone forward in time and then looked back at the present day. That's quite a clever technique. The learner says here, the effect this has on me as a reader is that this is showing me that the writer isn't treating us like we don't know how to read the character's development and is creating a complex character. Now, that's a really good in-depth answer over 2.5 pages for question 3, which is plenty actually for that question. And look at the feedback here, 8 out of 8, excellent answer. So just to recap quickly there, we've got structural techniques mentioned such as rising tension, we've got the shift in focus, and we've got why the learner thinks the writer has done that. So there are other classic structural techniques you could mention. You could have mentioned the circular narrative. You could mention the flash forward and the flash back in time, and they all would have been valid points. So some of you struggle with structure more than language. So I'd recommend that you revise your structural techniques, shift in focus, flashback, the mood and the tone that the writer creates. I hope that helps, and good luck with question 3.